Summerlin from Chicago, Illinois. Just wanted to give a huge shout out to the Relay for all the love and support they've given my team and I. And make sure you stay tuned for all the latest boxing news.
Welcome to the motherfucking Relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this, a bit of lightweight news, which seems to be a story that some are deliberately misreading or misrepresenting.
An idiot that goes by the name Boxing Ego.
Boxing Shemale stated, wait, so the great Lomachenko was ready to fight George Kambosos Jr. in Australia straight away, but needs a tune-up to fight Devin Haney? LOL. And don't give me that fresh out of war stuff. He's saving Private Ryan or Hacksaw Ridge. Usyk fighting AJ in a rematch straight away.
Some people are so hapless that they have to misrepresent boxing news in order to create content.
If this guy's doing anything, he is deliberately misreading a story. He is deliberately misrepresenting a situation because Vasyl Lomachenko isn't fighting in a tune-up fight for no reason.
Devin's not available. Everybody with a functioning brain cell knows that.
Everybody with a functioning brain cell knew ahead of Devin Haney versus George Kambosos Jr. that George Kambosos Jr. has a rematch clause. And if he loses the first fight, he can so activate that rematch clause to get Devin back in the ring. And shortly after dropping that decision to Devin Haney, that's what he did. He activated his rematch clause. That's why Devin isn't available for Vasyl Lomachenko to fight him.
This is not some convoluted, complicated, conflated situation.
Devin's not available. It really is that simple. His next fight is already scheduled on BoxRec, set to go down in October.
He has to fight George because George has a rematch clause. If he don't fight him, he gets sued.
He gets taken to court, the same way that Hasim Rahman was taken to court over a decade ago by Lennox Lewis when he tried to bail on Lennox. Lennox, who had a rematch clause, the same way that George Kambosos had a rematch clause. I mean, this is all pretty straightforward.
But you got guys like Boxing He-She that want to misrepresent this story. They want to misrepresent this news.
People eat it up because they want to eat it up. They want to be lied to. They don't want to know what's actually going on. They just want to hear a good story. A story where it's Vasyl Lomachenko circumventing a Devin Haney fight when in reality, Devin Haney is not available to fight Vasyl Lomachenko.
This schmuck is trying to make it seem like Vasyl Lomachenko is willfully avoiding Devin when Devin's busy.
It's actually Devin who's preoccupied through no fault of his own. George has got a rematch clause. What the hell's he going to do? He has to fight him.
If he doesn't, he'll be in breach of their initial contract, their initial agreement. That's stipulated. George
has the right to a rematch if he loses the first fight. George has the right to a second fight, and he has so exercised the right to that second fight. Devin Haney's got to honor it. It's not about Vasyl Lomachenko skipping out on Devin. It's actually Devin who's busy, Devin who's preoccupied. But guys like Boxing He-She want to misrepresent this story and misrepresent this news.
If Devin Haney has to fight George Kambosos Jr. for a second time, what do you propose Vasyl Lomachenko do in the meantime? Nothing?
You want he shouldn't fight at all this year? Or doesn't it make more sense for Vasyl Lomachenko to tune up in a tune-up fight because Devin's busy anyway? You ain't got access to that guy till this second fight with George is over.
What this bozo, like a lot of other bozos, is doing is trying to keep up appearances and keep spinning a narrative.
A narrative where Vasyl Lomachenko checks under the bed at night for Big Bad Devin because he's so afraid of him.
And don't misunderstand me, this is less about Devin and more about the losers and bozos who misappropriate his name.
And are currently using him as the centerpiece for the yarns they want to spin. Devin's not available. It really is that simple.
Some people are confused by the situation, confused by all of this, thinking that Devin Haney can simply drop the alphabet titles so he doesn't have to fight George anymore.
It's not the alphabet organizations ordering a rematch. It's not the alphabet organizations behind all of this, the WBC, the WBA, the WBO, or the IBF. Devin could drop every single one of those alphabet titles, and he'd still be on the hook contractually to face George for a second time because this is in reference to the contract he signed, the initial contract, the initial agreement that states
if George loses, he is entitled to a second fight. That's how rematch clauses work.
Boxing being as convoluted as it is at times, especially its infrastructure and what kind of language goes into a contract, it's not the worst thing in the world that some people can be confused by this, not understanding that it's the contract that empowers George to a second fight. It's the contract that entitles him to one, not the alphabets, not the alphabet organizations.
Dropping those alphabet titles wouldn't change a goddamn thing. You've got to fight him again.
So there is something to be said for those who willfully avoid doing the legwork, those who willfully avoid doing the research. This story was widely reported upon ahead of the fight with George Kambosos Jr. That George, if he loses, he has the right to a second fight, and it has to go down in Australia. We talked about that many times here on this channel.
This isn't some new revelation that just came out on the heels of George's first professional loss to Devin.
This information has been out there the whole time, and there are a lot of people that are too stupid and too fucking lazy,
too dim-witted to do the research and the reading themselves.
And those are the kind of people that boxing he-she preys upon. Those are the kind of people that boxing ego panders to, deliberately misreading and misrepresenting a story that's pretty straightforward. Devin's not available to fight Vasyl Lomachenko unless George is willing to step aside. And I'd wager him activating that rematch clause?
Call me crazy, but him activating that rematch clause must mean he doesn't want to step aside. He wants a second fight.
I know I'd prefer to see Devin Haney versus Vasyl Lomachenko in the fall as opposed to a second George Kambosos Jr. fight, because I don't think it's going to go any differently than the first fight did. I'd rather see Devin Haney versus Vasyl Lomachenko.
But George has a rematch clause. What do you expect Devin to do? Skip out on him and get sued?
Even worse is that boxing he-she brought up the Joshua versus Usyk rematch, and you will notice that, yes, Usyk is fighting Anthony Joshua for a second time because Anthony Joshua had a rematch clause, like George has a rematch clause for an immediate rematch.
Otherwise, Usyk would be chasing down a Fury fight right now, if he had the liberty to do so.
No content creator that's been creating content as long as boxing he-she, otherwise known as boxing ego, can plead ignorance.
He likes to call himself new media, but he's been creating content on YouTube for something like 10 years?
Yeah, if that's what you want to call lying to people, deliberately misreading and misrepresenting stories.
For as long as this guy's been a content creator, he should be able to understand this situation.
It's either the guy's too stupid or he's pretending to be in order to continue propagating this narrative.
Been a content creator in the sport of boxing on YouTube for over 10 years. You don't fucking know how a rematch clause works.
What are you, stupid or something? You got a learning disability?
You've been covering the sport of boxing for over 10 years and you don't know how rematch clauses work. Or is it that you do know how rematch clauses work and you're deliberately misrepresenting this story?
False prophets for profit, fake members of the media.
That's what's really going on here.
Quickly, just in 10 seconds or less, if you and Devin were to fight at 140 pounds, what happens?
Sign the contract first, and then we could talk about it. I mean, like, that's it. Now, I don't want to talk about these guys, man. Why am I going to give them something that they haven't even earned? They haven't earned it, bro. That's all played out, man. These guys are man-made. And I feel like all y'all know that because y'all under their payroll. Majority of y'all under their payroll. So y'all got to talk about these boys. I'm going to expose all of y'all, too, at the same time. I'm just going to do it in God's timing because I think it's flawed. I think it's messed up. I think it's just wrong how people got to pay to make themselves there. I didn't pay myself to make it here. I worked my ass to make it here. And that's what's going to last longer than them. You know what I'm saying? They say it like this. Of course, fast success builds ego. Slow success builds character. And that's why even though they do what they do, they all want to be Teofimo and deep down inside. They want to know how I do it. They want to know how I think. But that's all God's creation, man. He gives me the keys, and the universe gives me the ways to do it.
Reigning undisputed lightweight champion Devin Haney reacted to these comments from Teofimo Lopez saying, "The weight cut has got his ass delirious. Teo hasn't changed. He's still delusional. He might be worse."
It might be, though. The truth isn't mutually exclusive. Even if some of Teofimo's cryptic talk...
Even if some of that stuff might be a bit hard to interpret and hard to understand, here's what isn't. There are fighters out there paying these content creators, these would-be members of the media, to propagate narratives on their behalf.
Everybody knows about it.
Everybody knows that what passes for punditry in the sport of boxing these days is basically journalism for hire.
Yeah, on the heels of Teofimo Lopez's recent divorce and his recent loss to George Kambosos Jr., his mental state might come under question.
And there may be a legitimate question there. There may be precedents to ask, is Teofimo really all right? Is he all there upstairs? Yeah, I get that, but what he mentioned, what he highlighted, what he's touching on.
That there are members of the media that cover the sport that are basically for hire? Yeah, that's real.
That's accurate. That's why there are so many members of the media that ask questions they already know the answers to. Whenever a Shakur Stevenson is asked about a Gervonta Davis, for example, Gervonta Davis, who his own promoter said in so many words, he's only going to fight in-house fights with in-house fighters.
Shakur Stevenson isn't in his house, so what the fuck are you asking Shakur about him for?
What you should be doing is asking Gervonta about about Shakur. And if you're not,
You're not.
well, we all know why.
You're not putting the pressure on Gervonta Davis to fight these fighters. You're not putting pressure on his promoter to make these fights.
You go up to every other fighter, you go up to everybody else with the name of Gervonta Davis to keep his name in circulation in reference to fights that you know aren't going to happen. And you're doing it because somebody's paying you to do it. Somebody's paying you to keep his name in circulation, knowing full well.
Floyd Mayweather Jr. himself stated quite publicly he wants Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson to leave Gervonta Davis alone.
What have you been living under a rock? You're coming up to everybody else with the name of a Gervonta Davis when you should be asking the hard questions to Gervonta Davis and his promoter. And it's these kinds of situations, I feel, that Teofimo Lopez was touching on and was talking about when he was interviewed by Marcos Villegas of Fight Hub. That's what he means. That's what he's referencing.
Marcos asked him about Devin Haney.
It seems that Teofimo Lopez feels there was something nefarious at work in the George Kambosos Jr. fight. In truth, I don't share in that sentiment. He lost that fight fair and square.
George beat him. He beat him fair and square, and it's not the end of the world, but he did beat him.
George beat him, and George himself, he got beat by Devin. It just is what it is.
I don't get the sense that there was any foul play involved.
And that's why some people, most, might be listening to these comments from Teofimo Lopez and coming to the conclusion that, maybe he's not all there upstairs. He's still trying to deal with the loss as best as he can, compensate for it with conspiracy theories. Though the truth, as stated, the truth itself is not mutually exclusive. There was some truth to what Teofimo Lopez was suggesting.
That some of these media members that ask these rhetorical questions are asking them because they're media for hire.
They're on somebody's payroll. That's the way that punditry works these days. These members of the media at times are just another arm of promotion to some fighters and some promotional outfits. That bit of it, that's actually true.
The bottom line here is that more than one thing can be true at the same time.
Even if Teofimo Lopez is a bit delusional after having lost that fight to George Kambosos Jr., and even if he is a bit delirious from having to make weight, that's what Devin Haney is suggesting. Even if that's true, Teofimo's not off base. Teofimo's not wrong. There are media members that are for hire, and they do run interference. They do run spin for certain promotional outfits and certain fighters.
They play favorites even though they're not supposed to. They're supposed to be unbiased, but they play favorites, and sometimes they're paid to play favorites.
More than one thing can be true at the same time. The saving grace, the silver lining here, is that regardless of Teofimo Lopez's mental state, given that Devin Haney's next fight is going to take place on the Top Rank and ESPN platform, where Teofimo Lopez fights,
most people think he's going to beat George again. I think he's going to beat George again.
it behooves Devin Haney to stay on that side of the street. It behooves Devin Haney to stay on the Top Rank ESPN side of things for either a continued lightweight campaign or a move upstairs to super lightweight, because Top Rank has the fights. Top Rank has the fighters. Teofimo Lopez being one among them, Vasyl Lomachenko being another.
Devin Haney has the unique opportunity to kill two birds with one stone by staying over there at Top Rank after the Kambosos rematch.
If he does, he can face Vasyl Lomachenko straight away and put that narrative to bed, that narrative to rest, in what could be a fight that Top Rank bills as a pay-per-view. And if it is a pay-per-view, I'm buying it because it's worth the money. Something very similar applies to a move upstairs to 140 pounds to potentially take on Teofimo Lopez.
He can stay at lightweight, fight Vasyl Lomachenko. If he beats him, he can move up, or he can just move up straight away. See about fighting Teofimo Lopez straight away.
Yet another fight that would get a lot of attention and a lot of viewership for the ESPN platform. One of the better fights to make in today's super lightweight division, if Devin Haney so decides to go up there after the Kambosos fight. The saving grace is that quips and conspiracy theories aside, things are set to heat up between 135 and 140 pounds real soon.
Have a history of y'all know each other pretty well. What's your thoughts on that though, you and Tank?
I think that's a super fight. I think that fight is bound to happen sooner or later. I think that it's going to be a huge fight wherever it's at, and the people are going to come out for it. I think it's going to be probably the biggest fight in boxing. And I'm not here to protect nothing. If a fighter is better than me, then show me. And I genuinely think that I'm the best fighter in the world. So I want to show you that I'm better than you. I'm better than everybody else. So that's what it is. I just want to test myself, test my skills against the best fighters in the world.
I didn't find Devin's response to these questions comforting. He still places a lot of value, still seems to place a lot of value on a Gervonta Davis fight that Floyd Mayweather Jr., in so many words, shut down. And last I checked, Gervonta Davis didn't go anywhere. He's still promoted by Mayweather Promotions. So if you know that his promoter doesn't seem to want to do that fight between him and you, and he told you to go fight somebody else and leave his guy alone,
You'll notice who's asking the questions.
you'll notice that even if Shakur don't bring up Gervonta Davis or Devin Haney, members of the media will bring him up. They'll bring up his name to these fighters.
And end up keeping Gervonta Davis's name in circulation for fights we all know he's not about to have.
Because his promoter, his own promoter, Floyd Mayweather Jr., said as much. So why are we still talking about this, and why do you keep bringing this guy's name up to all these other fighters? It just doesn't make sense. Moreover, Devin Haney still places a lot of value on that fight.
And he shouldn't, because there's no value in a fight that isn't going to happen.
You don't make any money from a fight that the other guy's team ain't trying to make. It takes two teams to make a fight, but it only takes one to fuck it all up.
As far as I'm concerned, everybody at 135 and 140 should shun Gervonta Davis and stop talking about him. Stop mentioning him.
And if it's not even the fighters themselves that are bringing his name up, if it's the members of the media that are bringing up his name to these fighters ought to tell those members of the media, hey, why don't you ask Gervonta Davis about me instead of asking me about him? You should ask Floyd.
You know, that's what Shakur Stevenson said more than once. Don't ask me about Gervonta. Ask Gervonta about me.
That is the adequate response to any questions that might be levied by members of the media in reference to these fighters and a Gervonta Davis fight.
It's not like anybody's making life-altering money fighting Gervonta Davis.
Leo Santa Cruz, a 4-division champion, got less money up front for that Gervonta Davis fight than Devin Haney just got to box George Kambosos Jr. in Australia. Leo Santa Cruz got what? $1.5 million up front, whereas Devin got $2.8 million without Gervonta Davis.
You're already making more money right now than Gervonta Davis pays out to his opponents.
Don't believe the hype. Gervonta Davis ain't paying nobody life-altering money to box him.
He's not.
Rolly Romero didn't get $2.8 million, or Isaac Cruz, or Leo Santa Cruz before him. The same way that Devin Haney just got $2.8 for boxing George Kambosos.
You keep entertaining these kinds of questions, and it's going to start to look like you're the one that's chasing around Gervonta, when in reality, it's the media that keeps bringing up his name.
They're the ones keeping his name in circulation, and they're the ones that are attaching his name to yours.
You entertain those questions, you're doing half the work for them.
And for what? For a fight that Floyd Mayweather Jr. said he doesn't want to make? It's an exercise in futility, if it's anything. And what Devin Haney really should focus on is the fights that he can have. The rematch he's about to have with George, a potential Lomachenko fight, which could get him even more money beyond that fight, and a potential Teofimo Lopez fight should he decide to move upstairs to 140 pounds. There are fights out there to make.
And money, but Gervonta Davis...
You're barking up the wrong tree. You place value on that fight because if it were to happen, it would be a decent-sized fight. If it were to happen, but it's not going to happen.
Floyd doesn't want it to.